Okay, let's talk about one of the most fascinating figures in history, a man named Omar Khayyam. And he presents us with this profound paradox. Because in the East, he was celebrated as this absolute giant of science and mathematics, but here in the West, he's famous for being a poet of wine, pleasure, and, well, a whole lot of doubt. I mean, just look at the two sides of the coin. On one hand, you have the Hakim, the wise man, the scientist. His world is built on pure logic, algebra, a search for cosmic order, all backed by rational proof. And on the other hand, you've got the poet of the Rubaiyat, a voice that is just filled with doubt, wrestling with fate, skepticism, and maybe finding some comfort in a glass of wine. So this brings us to the central mystery we're going to unravel today. How can these two seemingly opposite personalities live inside the same head? It feels impossible, right? Well, let's figure it out. First, let's meet the man that the people of his own time knew. This is Khayyam the rationalist, a towering intellect who literally built new universes out of pure logic and numbers. So around the year 1070, he did something that was absolutely revolutionary for mathematics. He wasn't just fiddling around solving a few problems here and there. No, he created the very first systematic general theory for solving cubic equations, a challenge that had stumped the greatest minds for centuries. And his method was it was pure genius. First, he took on the monumental task of classifying every single type of cubic equation. Then, and this is the brilliant part, he merged algebra with geometry, using shapes like parabolas and circles. He proved that the solution you're looking for is just the exact point where two of these curves intersect. And get this, he then argued that finding a purely algebraic solution was impossible, a claim that stood for 700 years before mathematicians finally proved he was right. But he wasn't content with just revolutionizing algebra. Oh no. In 1077, he decided to take on the very bedrock of geometry, Euclid. Specifically, he went after the famous parallel postulate, an idea that mathematicians had accepted for over 1,000 years, but that just didn't sit right with Khayyam's incredibly rigorous mind. And here's where it gets amazing. In his attempt to prove that Euclid was correct, he actually, completely accidentally stumbled upon the very first theorems of non-Euclidean geometry. You know, the math of curved space that Einstein would later use? Khayyam was laying the groundwork for it, centuries before anyone else even dreamed of it. It was a magnificent failure. Now, this obsession with precision wasn't just a theoretical game for him. He was the head of a major observatory, and his job was to fix the Persian calendar. To do that, he had to calculate the exact length of a solar year. And just look at that number. That is the result of painstaking, real-world observation and calculation. So, just how accurate was he? Well, this chart really puts it into perspective. The Jalali calendar that he designed is so precise, it's only off by one single day every 5,000 years. Compare that to the Gregorian calendar, the one we all use right now, which is off by a day every 3,300 years. That's right, his calendar from the 11th century was significantly more accurate than ours. Just let that sink in.
Okay, so we have this incredible architect of order and precision. Got it. But now we have to make a hard pivot. We're leaving that world of certainty behind and stepping into the world of the poet, a world drenched in profound philosophical doubt.
And this is the voice that took the Western world by storm. It's a voice that speaks of this relentless, unchangeable fate. There's a moving finger writing your story, and once it's written, that's it. Nothing you can do, not your goodness, not your cleverness, not your tears, can change a single word. So what's he really talking about in these poems? Well, it all circles around a few core ideas that are all tangled together. First, life is shockingly short and you never know when it's going to end. Second, your destiny is already written for you. Third, because of those two things, he's deeply skeptical about promises of an afterlife or divine justice, which leads him to his big conclusion, the fourth theme: the only logical response is to seize the day, carpe diem. Enjoy the here and now because it's all you've got. So, the big question is, how did this skeptical, wine-loving poet completely overshadow the brilliant calendar-making scientist, at least in the West? To solve our paradox, we need to understand how Khayyam got a major rebrand in the 19th century. And the man responsible is an English writer named Edward FitzGerald. In 1859, he published his version of the Rubaiyat. And he was refreshingly honest about his work. He didn't even call it a translation. He used the word transmogrification. He was basically telling everyone, hey, I'm not just translating this word for word, I'm reimagining it, shaping it into something new. And FitzGerald's version became an absolute cultural sensation. Why? Perfect timing. This ancient voice of Persian skepticism spoke directly to the anxieties of the Victorian era. Think about it. This was the age of Darwin, a time when new scientific discoveries were shaking the very foundations of religious faith. FitzGerald's Khayyam was the perfect poet for a new age of doubt. But as if this wasn't confusing enough, the mystery gets even deeper. We honestly have no idea how many of these poems Khayyam actually wrote. Just look at this chart. The scholarly disagreement is wild. Some experts say he wrote over 100, others argue it's as few as 14, and some modern scholars even make the case that he wrote 0, that his famous name just became a label that got attached to all sorts of anonymous, skeptical poems. On top of all that, people can't even agree on what the poems mean. There are two main camps. The majority view is the skeptical one. The language is literal. Wine means wine, and the poet is telling you to enjoy life. But there's a minority view that says it's all symbolic Sufi mysticism, that wine is really divine ecstasy and the tavern is a spiritual meeting place. Now, while that might seem to solve our paradox, it doesn't really fit with the relentlessly rational man we know from history. The skeptical reading just makes a lot more sense. All right, we've met the scientist, we've met the poet, we've seen the controversies. Now it's time to bring them together and solve this thing once and for all. Because this isn't a story about two different people. It's about one single, unified, and brutally honest mind. And here's the key that unlocks the whole puzzle. Think of it as the is versus ought thesis. His science, his life's work, was all about describing the universe as it is, a complex, beautiful, orderly machine that doesn't really care about us. His poetry, on the other hand, is the raw, emotional outcry about what his heart felt the universe ought to be, a place with meaning, with justice, with some kind of permanence. See? They're not in conflict. One is a logical observation, the other is a very human reaction to that observation. So his poetry isn't a contradiction of his science at all. It's the most personal and painful application of it. You could call it a metaphysical rebellion. It's the sound a supreme rationalist makes when he turns that powerful, logical lens away from the predictable stars and points it at the messy, chaotic, beautiful human condition and finds no easy answers, no simple proofs. So in the end, there are no two Khayyams. There is only one. The poet is simply what the scientist becomes when he turns his relentless, honest, and rational gaze from the cold, orderly stars to the warm, chaotic, and suffering human heart. And that leaves us with one final big question to chew on. Khayyam's entire intellectual journey was driven by a refusal to accept anything without proof. So it really makes you wonder, is profound, unsettling doubt the inevitable price you pay for having a truly rational mind?